For the longest time, I wanted to do a video like this on Vagabond. I just wasn't sure if I wanted to do it specifically on Musashi as a character, or on Vagabond as a whole, as a story. And recently, I reread the entire series, and I thought it was time that I actually put out a big video for one of my favorite manga of all time. Vagabond is the manga legendary author Takehiko Inoue would find success creating after his hit series Slam Dunk, which actually ranks as the 7th best-selling manga of all time, coming out during the era of the Chicago Bulls dynasty and the explosion of basketball internationally because of the Dream Team. The Shohoku team from Slam Dunk had perfect marketing, which, speaking from personal experience, the color red always works. In fact, Slam Dunk was actually so big during the time that it came out that I found out recently even my mom used to watch the anime back for it when she was younger. But how does an author really move on from such success? Would Inoue go on to make another basketball series? Actually, yeah, he did. It's called Buzzer Beater, but as you can imagine, it's the least recognizable of all his works, and I personally have not read it yet. After the attempt of creating another basketball series, however, Inoue would go on to make his best work, Vagabond. Suck it, Roma. Vagabond is famous and infamous for two things: hiatus, please, I need another chapter, and its jaw-dropping and iconic artwork. The amount of times you'll see a Vagabond panel posted over Twitter is insane, but they're genuinely amazing-looking panels. However, I think that has caused for some pretty horrendous takes regarding the series, or if not a mindset that Vagabond is only its artwork. Now, trust me, there are plenty of pretentious Vagabond fans as well who think it's beyond the greatest thing ever written and nothing else comes close, and that's just as annoying. But just as Berserk sometimes can be seen only for its violence at first glance, which is something that I might have to get into due to some BS that happened recently, Vagabond is so much more than the beautifully illustrated panel. To give an example, Sunken Rock is another series that's easily recommendable and recognizable due to its artwork. You're able to be like, yo, look how good this manga looks, and many times that'll draw in enough people to read it. However, I think Sunken Rock is a story that, whilst although it's incredibly entertaining and fun, it's very lacking in its narrative, and as a story is, oh, well. And there are other stories like The Climber and Innocent that are just incredible when it comes to their artwork. But those are stories that I would argue genuinely have a lot when it comes to their actual narrative and characters as well. Now, what stories like Climber and Innocent and Vagabond have in common, that for the most part, these are stories that are very grounded in realism, showing essentially a person's everyday life, as well as in terms of artistic style being a lot more faithful to what an actual person looks like versus the typical cartoony anime style. Now, does that mean it's automatically better?
Is it okay for me to wear my shoes in here?
I don't give a shit.
Again, that's all subjective because it's art. However, the reason as to why I bring that up is because Vagabond is a very intimate story due to this. There isn't some sort of grand, awesome narrative. There isn't some giant monster to be conquered or defeated. It's not flashy whatsoever. Vagabond is very quiet. It's very intimate. And dare I say it sometimes can come off as boring. It doesn't have the fast-paced horror elements of a thriller. It doesn't have the incredible but yet disturbing elements of a dark fantasy. This is a biographical interpretation done by Inoue on the person of Musashi Miyamoto. And I think it's because of this, because of the story that it is and the style of story that it is, Vagabond is allowed to be an extremely character-focused and character-driven story. And that's not to say that other stories aren't character-focused or character-driven, but the entire narrative of Vagabond is the growth of Musashi Miyamoto. When you talk about some of the best character development in anime and manga, there's a reason why Musashi gets brought up, and that's because his story is about his development from the get-go. It's about the life of this Vagabond, and we simply get to see other characters who interact with this Musashi. Something that's put even clearer back in a 2010 interview Inoue was a part of. Quote, "It's true. You could say Slam Dunk virtually had no sub-stories, but with Vagabond, I don't think any of the stories in there as sub-stories. I don't see it as divided between the duels as the main story and everything else as mere sub-stories. Vagabond is the journey of Musashi the person. With Slam Dunk, the matches themselves were stories about life, but most people's lives aren't like that. Sure, sometimes Musashi goes through duel after duel, but it's not something he does every single day. Life consists more of time spending on inane things. Life is a series of moments of being stuck, unable to move forward. You meet people and interact with them. You worry, you get depressed, and they're all important stories. So I can't see them as divided into main stories and sub-stories. Slam Dunk was about basketball, so it was okay for it to have match after match. But with Musashi, I can't just have him do nothing but go around dueling people. He'd wind up dead in no time." End quote. It's always extremely fun for me to read what authors have to say about their own series and get their perspective on it. But looking back at Vagabond, especially through this lens, one can really tell just the amount Musashi goes through as a character after conflict. And I think that's really essential to the story of Vagabond. It's more than just the duels and again the flashy artwork that we see during those duels. It's the moment of reflection where Musashi wonders whether or not he's truly growing as a person. At the beginning of Vagabond, we see Musashi, who at the time goes by Takezo, as an extremely violent person, aggressive and like a wild beast in combat. That is who he is. He knows nothing, he has no value, he has no purpose outside of battle, and he desires strength. But that desire for strength and the true purpose behind it is something we'll get into more, as well as two other very primary characters into the story that I think really paint the picture of what Vagabond is about. But there's a part early on in Vagabond where Musashi would go up against Inshun, another character who pretty much only knows battle, but spirit is much more calm and cold than Musashi's ever was, being much more fiery and again akin to a beast. And after their conflict, it's where Vagabond truly shows its beauty, because the fight, in all honesty, isn't insane. There isn't some great choreography, especially when you consider the fact that the majority of the fight is just these two standing and observing each other. And it's after this conflict where we get to see the inside of Inshun's person, and that's that he lived his entire life simply burying everything under sand. He never moved forward from the spot he was in when he was younger, never moving on from the pains and the suffering that he had. He was always in the same place, but just covered it up. And on top of that just being a beautiful representation of suppressed feelings and memories, I think it just goes on to show Inoa's entire mindset when writing Vagabond, because he doesn't see the fights and the duels as the major moments, and everything else in between is just his way of getting to those moments. But if not, it's the moments in between and what these conflicts mean to the characters that he truly puts so much effort and detail into. And this goes for every duel in the series, serving as simply a test for everything we see Musashi go through internally as a person in between all of these moments. But what are these internal struggles? What is Musashi's growth and need as a character? In between the heat of battle, what is it that allows us to see the growth in Musashi Miyamoto? And in an interesting way, the growth of Musashi feels a lot like Inoa's entire approach when writing this story, focusing on the entire tree, not just the leaf. Seeing more beyond life than what we are physically capable of doing is what Musashi's character is about. The realization of what strength truly is and growing from that. Remember, at the beginning of the series, the whole demon child, the beast, a character who we're presented to as extremely intimidating and powerful through his aggressiveness, but that strength of his can only go so far. Physical strength can only take you so far, because what's even more important is the strength of one's character and of one's mind. And this might have been something that Inoue might have taken from his stint doing basketball stories, but the entire mentality within an athlete is almost just as important, if not more important, than the athlete's actual technical ability and skill. But I digress. Musashi's want as a character is to become stronger, and to become stronger and stronger and stronger until he's known as invincible under the sun. But eventually, as the story goes on, Musashi comes to realize that that's simply nothing but a word, and his desires were a bit vain. And what I love about this next part is it isn't really explicitly told to us, but if not more so shown, and that's Musashi's relationship with his own father. It's deep-rooted in vengeance and anger, and we see that reflected through the way that Musashi fights early on as Takezo. It came from a place, and you can see this as the series goes on, of constantly feeling inferior to everyone else, always finding someone who always made him feel tiny, to put it into better terms. And even more so, what is the purpose of becoming stronger? What happens once he's the one invincible under the sun, the best swordsman known? What happens? What gain is there for that? Or is it simply a title that you hold on to with no true meaning that will only bring suffering? What is it that he truly wants in life? Maybe instead of being invincible under the sun, what he actually wants or what he needs is love. To move away from this life of fighting. Because once you enter it, it is nothing but an endless spiral of death as time moves on and those who have died, and those who lived on simply become forgotten. And you see, none of us can relate to being swordsmen, at least I hope so, since it's 2022. But anyways, it really does challenge the idea of why we have ambitions in life, and whether the ambitions that we pursue will truly bring us the happiness we think they will, or are they simply dreams that we chase in vain, only to find out once we've achieved them that they mean nothing. And now we've simply wandered a lonely road instead of taking the opportunity to show love and take time with people who could be there for us right now. But instead we cling on to the past and allow the events of our past to dictate how we live for the future. And it's this kind of turning point where we truly get to see the growth and the development of Musashi once he finally lets go of the hatred he had for his father and finds that new strength. It's a story of a man who's constantly questioning the life that he lives and whether or not he's doing the right thing or doing something of any meaning at all. And what I love is after defeating 70 men, 70 swordsmen, in that aftermath, despite being renowned throughout the entire area as the legendary Musashi Miyamoto who defeated 70 men, you can see the pain and the suffering that he goes through of constantly being challenged. Instead of going out and seeking battle and bloodthirsty vengeance, he now draws a circle around himself, wishing that people wouldn't cross that line so he wouldn't have to strike them down. It's a beautiful demonstration of Musashi's maturity and his understanding of the value of life. And to me, that's what Vagabond is really about, as we then after this get to see Musashi help out a local people on a farm. He didn't have to do that. He has no reason to be there. But if not, he stays and helps these people survive, showing even further how much he's come as a person. Now, I doubt we'll ever get a finish to Vagabond, but if you were to say it out loud, Vagabond is a story that starts off with a young, reckless man who desires to become the best swordsman in the world, and in the recent arc, he's helping people on a farm. It sounds a bit comical, but the beauty and the growth that we see from this person is immense. And for me, that's the true beauty of Vagabond. It's seeing a man learn and grow throughout his walk of life, through all the many different internal conflicts. And it's even more of a beautiful contrast when you bring in two other very primary characters, and that is Marahachi, who's the first one I want to get into. Marahachi was the friend of Musashi, and they end up getting split up due to circumstances, and it's very clear that Marahachi is very different from his counterpart, Takezo or Musashi. Musashi being a very strong person from the get-go in terms of physical ability, seeming fearless, someone who could push forward and become stronger, versus Marahachi, who was a person who constantly fell back on his cowardice and never really grew from his need for desires and pleasures. He's somebody who's weak. Musashi, in my eyes, or the person Musashi becomes, is the ideal. Marahachi is the reality. He is the reality of those who cannot become stronger, those who are weak. And how does one go about accepting oneself in that kind of condition? Because by the time in the story that we are in, Marahachi has lost it all. He's lost his own mother, in fact. And it's at that moment where I think Marahachi realizes that the opportunities he had to correct himself in life are now past him. And now he needs to live the rest of his life being okay with himself and enjoying that. And then we have Sasaki Kojiro. As much as I want to see the ultimate confrontation versus Kojiro and Musashi, I think seeing both of their backstories and how they are is what truly makes their dynamic interesting. Kojiro has a sense of freedom. There's a lightness about him. Musashi, as you could tell, has gone through all these different conflicts and these burdens, but Kojiro from the get-go seems to be free, be completely light, just someone who enjoys the life that he lives, despite the condition of him being both deaf and mute. And I think it's due to his light nature that he's able to swing his sword as fast as he can. As in Vagabond, I think the swordsman and their relationship with their blade is a very key reflection of who they are on the inside, and Kojiro's freeness is a very beautiful contrast to the amount that Musashi's had to conflict within himself, as his desire to wield the blade doesn't come from a hateful place like Musashi's originally did, but if not, it's his way of communicating with other people. Kojiro's use of the sword is what genuinely brings him happiness, and so he's not the evil antagonist that other stories would have, but if not simply, he's one who lies in opposition to Musashi. Or well, would have if we would have gotten the chapter. But Musashi is a character we see who has grown through some sort of acceptance of his own pains of his past and moving away from that dark road, versus Kojiro, who is a man who seems pure in his way of life. He isn't someone who's needed to contend with his own purpose in living, he just lives. And part of that could be due to the fact that up to this point, Kojiro never really had a true challenge. He's pretty much easily bested everyone he's gone up against. But what happens when a man who's naturally born talented and has just lived his life and hasn't had the need to conflict with himself? What happens when he finally is reached with the challenge that pushes him to do so? Well, sadly, due to a hiatus that I'm pretty sure we've all accepted as a cancellation up to this point, we will never know. And it's a shame because I truly thought while I was rereading Vagabond, and even my first time reading it a few years back, that it was a story that got better and better and better as it went on. But up to that point where it was at, and with the final exhibition chapter that we ended up getting, all of that shows is a story about the character, about the growth of a person, and about the different walks of life, and how those different walks of life, when leading to conflict, how it can cause people to grow and change because of that. And it is a story that constantly forces one to question the deepest parts of ourselves, our past, our desires, and how we choose to live life. And we get all this through the story of Musashi Miyamoto, the Vagabond. And that is why Vagabond is more than just art.